Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope that you are all doing good. So, if you can still remember our previous lesson, we discussed all about the effective communication in a certain organization or workplace. For today's video, we will be having our next lesson, and that will be barriers to communication in the workplace. So it's not enough that we can effectively communicate in the workplace, but the question is how can we effectively communicate in a certain organization if there are a lot of barriers along the communication process. So that will be the very lesson or the very topic that we will be discussing throughout this video lecture. Before I proceed to the very lesson, let's have first our objectives. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain how to overcome the different barriers to communication in the workplace and identify what are these communication barriers and answer the given assessment. Throughout the video lecture, we will have the typical workplace communication barriers, the first lesson, and the strategies to overcome these communication barriers. So how important communication barriers in the workplace? So strong communication skills in the workplace foster a positive work environment and can enhance job satisfaction. It's a matter of cause and effect. If if for example you have a strong communication in the workplace, therefore there is a positive work environment. It will lead to positive work environment, and positive work environment will lead to job satisfaction. Effective workplace communication facilitates not just effective, take note of that, but efficient completion of project. If there is a strong and effective and also efficient communication, then probably there is a great completion of the projects or a certain project. So what are the barriers to communication in the workplace? So barriers to communication in the workplace are anything, take note of that prevents or misconstrue the effective delivery of message. So what are these? Anything. First, we have physical. Next, we have emotional and linguistic. Now let's discuss first the physical barrier. Physical barriers to communication deal with the environmental surrounding at your job, the nature of remote work, which can slow communication efforts. For example, if you are working remotely, if you are working remotely, the rest of the group, from the rest of the group, basically there is a slow communication process. Just think of this: if you are a type of person na very introvert, for example, na dili kay kabalo makig-socialize, wala ka aning atong gitawag nga interpersonal communication or interpersonal relationship, di ba, you are working remotely and wala kay communication from the rest of the group or from the rest of the class. Ingana pod ang physical barrier. If you will try to enclose someone from the rest of the group, then ayo pag-expect na naay communication process or naay smooth nga flow of communication kay he or she or that particular person or employee is working remotely from the rest of the staff man or employees. Right? Next, let's talk about emotional barrier. An intimidating supervisor might cause anxiety and depression. Take note of that among employees, discouraging open discussion. That's why, class, I don't want you to be intimidated. I don't want you to feel intimidated sa ako because it can cause anxiety sa inyo, especially if dili niyo ma-address yung concern. Kaya I have experienced that and I was still studying. Even right now, I am still studying, di ba? Na if your instructor is quite intimidating, most likely you are afraid to ask questions. You're afraid to give your ideas. Kasi that particular person is not open for discussion. He or she also thinks that he is above than anyone else or she is above than the rest of the group. Okay? So that dapat as a leader, as a individual, we have to think and we have to accept that not every time we are all superior and we are all knowledgeable, all knowing. Okay? We can make mistakes, we can learn from our mistakes, and most especially, we can learn from our experiences. All right? Now let's talk about linguistic barrier. So the use of unfamiliar jargon, vague body language, or differing dialects can cause communication gaps. So take note of that, unfamiliar jargon or technical terminologies. Kanang dili ka familiar ano nga terminologies. For example, jargon sa mga doctors are different from jargons sa mga lawyers. So as jargon sa mga lawyers, different from jargons sa mga teachers. Okay? So if you are using jargons, most likely na communication barriers, particularly sa linguistic na aspect. So communication barriers affect your ability to perform your job duties and can complicate workplace relationship and impact overall team performance. So sinagap po siya cause and effect. If naakay communication barriers, maapektuhan ang ability to communicate, therefore maapektuhan ang relationship, and therefore maapektuhan ang overall performance sa usa ka team. So what are these typical communication barriers? We have information overload. So sharing too much information because you are eager to help may cause or emphasis or may lose emphasis on the key points. For example, you are teaching and the time is running, you don't have ample of time to discuss. You are trying to compress everything in just a short period of time. For example, ang bata, information overload na siya. And ang imong emphasis noon nawala because you're just beating around the bush. Wala kay a focus. You don't have a certain focus on what you are lecturing or what you are sharing from the class. Because you are trying to compress a certain discussion given a short period of time. Kaya gadali man ka. Okay? Next, like what I've said, we have the industry-specific jargon. So each industry has their own technical terminology or jargon that professionals rely on to communicate quickly. However, the use of unfamiliar terms or overcomplicated technical terms could not be well understood. So take note of that you should avoid using jargons. Then, we have language barrier. When someone's primary language differs from your own, you may have trouble understanding them or understanding one another. Thus, it is very necessary to be mindful of your communication difficulties. That's why we should understand that that person doesn't know the language that you are comfortable with. Same with, I want to encourage my students that you can use any language you're comfortable. I want you to speak English, but not to the expense na, or extend rather na, you are no longer comfortable with the language. Okay? If you're not comfortable, therefore, you can communicate well. But I encourage everyone to speak English. It's very nice to hear that there are a lot of people or a lot of students they are learning by doing or by applying what they have learned, and that is language acquisition you acquired through experiences through the use of that specific medium of communication. Then, differing communication styles. One individual may be very direct and concise, while other needs time to get their message across and prefers to provide many details. That's why in my class, I don't encourage lengthy discussions or lengthy answers. However, there are instructors or teachers na mas prefer nila nga you write or you communicate in a lengthy manner. But that's their style. But in my case, what's the point of being concise and crisp if you are giving them if you are encouraging them to be lengthy with their answers. All right? So for me, I don't need you to be lengthy because the amount of words you use doesn't define how intelligent you are or how conversant you are as an individual. 2 to 3 sentences for me is more than enough as long as you are very concise and crisp rather with your communication. It's more than enough for me. Next, cultural differences. When someone's primary language differs from your own, you may have trouble understanding one another. So cultural difference may seem the same with language barrier. However, when we say language, you are just being specific with the language. But in culture, you are not just focused on the language, but how the person or how this group of people act or behave. Diba? So if they don't want to eat that particular food that you're trying them to eat, then do not force them. The same with if they're not comfortable with that specific language, do not force them because in their culture, they want to speak that particular language. They want to act their own culture. Right? So you have to foster that instead of trying to change them. Next, physical disability is also an example of communication barrier. If the receiver has hearing problems or the speaker has speech disabilities, then communication will not be effective. Next, impatient or inactive is also an example of communication barrier. Disinterest by focusing on electronic devices or glancing away may cause the exchange to lose substance. That's why if someone is speaking, then you should listen. Diba? And you should not intervene or interfere. If nagstorya pa gani ang tao, let him or her finish his sentence or her sentence before you give your opinion. That's the right way. Right? Then vague or indirect message. What you say and how you say it are equally important to delivering a message effectively. Lacking confidence in your delivery and using the passive voice affects how your audience receives the information provided. Alright? So do not be passive. Alright? Then, disinterest or disengagement or what we call detachment. Engaging in a side conversation during a presentation or answering a call while in a meeting distracts your attention and impedes your ability to pick up on nonverbal cues. So that's why we should be focused and not be detached from that particular conversation kay mawala ta. Imbis kay maghatag ta sa itong idea, kabantay mo class if you have experience to become to become a judge in a particular event or competition, you should be focused. Kay if gani dili ka maka-focus nya, for example na nag-cellphone ka or nakagipangutana sa imong tapan nga judge, then na siya gi-perform nga extraordinary, di mo na makita. And it can affect the overall result. Okay, so dapat focus good ka. From the very beginning up to the end, focus ka. You are very attached, connected ka sa performance. So same with communication. Then, we have mismatched verbal and nonverbal cues. Body language is important when speaking and presenting. The audience may misinterpret your message and for a while, the audience may misinterpret your message and become confused based on your verbal and nonverbal cues. For example, this one. Sa atong context, in the Philippine context, this means okay. Or it could be mean, okay, okay, are you okay? Yes, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm doing good. I'm good or ingani. But, sa lahing context, this means you're asking for money. Diba? So dapat you should be very careful with your non-verbal cues, particularly kay it could mean something from a different context. Then we have strategies to overcome barriers to communication in the workplace. Same with effective communication. We have strategies how to make things right. First, be fully present. Withhold any assumptions about the information being shared with you as you listen. Listen attentively and actively and wait until later to provide feedback. So like what I've said, di ba? So we should hold first our assumption, kaya basin judgmental rata, then after that, after he or she finishes his or her sentence, then let's give our feedback afterwards. Then be specific in your information. Be concise and give others the opportunity to ask clarifying questions to make the exchange of information dynamic. Gatuyok siya. Dili siya one-sided. Dyadic siya. Triadic siya. Sorry for that for a while. So that's it. Di ba? For a conversation to be dynamic, you should allow that person also to talk. Di lang ikaw all the time. Then, use words and tone that convey confidence. Work on eliminating words like like, di ba? So, I think that which don't add to the information and may distract your audience. Well, anyway, we are still learning, di ba? So, nandiyo tayo mga fillers. Even ako, ga-fillers ko, like, kasi I have to think, but according to the slides na use words and tone that convey confidence. It doesn't mean that you're not confident. It's just that you have to think of something before you speak, diba? Especially that English is not our native language. Then encourage questions. To avoid communication pitfalls in the future, be inviting and prompt others you communicate with consistently to ask questions. So you have to follow up. That's why I have my evaluation form. Kasi even if you are asynchronous, I want to evaluate myself through your evaluations if okay ba akong performance, if I have to change something, if I have to improve something, if I have to continue what I am doing. Alright? So evaluation is very important for me kay it can assess my performance in delivering my class. Then mirror others. Responds properly to someone else's body languages, such as laughing when they laugh, smiling in response to a grin, or using similar hand gestures to show empathy, a skill crucial to building rapport with or along with other people. So you have to reciprocate. Sabot sa mirror is when someone is sharing, then you have to listen, and then if di katawa siya, if katawanan po, then you have to laugh. Dili kay, okay, then, oh, all right, then what's next? So what then? Whatever. Kasi there is no, you're not meeting halfway ba? Diba? So you should mirror. You then wait for your turn to talk. The strongest communications spend more time listening than they do speaking. Absorb the information completely before speaking to avoid judgment. Maintaining effective communication in the workplace builds a positive workplace environment, improves productivity, and enables effective teamwork. So what's next for our next lesson? Let's discuss personal branding. So that's our lesson for today, class. I hope that you have learned a lot from this subject, and don't forget also to answer the evaluation form to assess my lesson for today's lesson, to assess myself the way I communicate with my students, with you. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again, this is your instructor, Robert John Dumadagipal, and see you in our next lesson.